All right, I see that it's 1 o'clock. Welcome, everyone. Welcome, Netroots Nation, to our panel, Want to Win in Battleground States, focus on immigrant Uber drivers, not just soccer moms. This panel was organized by my good friend, the activist, documentarian extraordinaire, Annabelle Park. So thank you, Annabelle, for bringing everyone together for this critical topic for the Democratic Party as we organize for the 2022 midterms. Um, One of our panelists, Dalila Reynoso, was not able to join us today, unfortunately, due to a medical emergency. And, we obviously hope that she recovers quickly. But before I introduce everyone, just a note on our agenda for the next hour. We'll do introductions. We'll move into a panelist discussion, and the last 20 minutes or so will be devoted to audience Q&A. However, there's a chat on the side of the, I guess on the sidebar, where you should put questions because as we can throughout this discussion, we will try to incorporate those into the discussion. So you don't have to save up everything for the end, but you should definitely be taking notes, and feel free to chime in the sidebar, and then we'll open the floor up to everyone at the end. So we will get rolling into it. First off, Aisha Yaqub Mahmood is an immigrants' right advocate who is the executive director of the nonprofit Asian American Advocacy Fund in Georgia, a 501c4. Her organization advocates for policies, endorses candidates, and works towards building a politically conscious, engaged, and progressive Asian American base in Georgia. We owe her and her team a huge debt of gratitude for flipping Georgia in 2020 and helping to win the 2 Senate seats there. Her organization also helped families impacted by the mass shooting in Atlanta in March. Aisha will talk about what went right in Georgia in 2020 and 2021 elections and what the takeaways are for other states. Annabelle Park is a first-generation Korean-American media maker and social entrepreneur. She is the producer and director of the award-winning documentary film 9500 Liberty about the culture war over immigration policy. She's been featured in the New York Times, Washington Post, and other media for her innovative approach to creating political change. After working on political campaigns in different capacities for years, she decided to create a team and focus on a way to make it easier to engage immigrant voters. They have developed a new mapping tool called Immigrant Voter Project that they launched this week at Netroots Nation. Annabelle is going to discuss the strategic importance of engaging immigrant voters in battleground states, review the challenges to effective engagement both inside and outside campaigns, and explain why she thinks the Immigrant Voter Project tool could be a game changer. I'm Lauren Windsor. I'm a partner in Democracy Partners, Michaelix Media, and I'm the executive director of American Family Voices, a 501c4 that fights for working and middle-class families on pocketbook economic issues. I produce a web show called The Undercurrent, where we hold politicians accountable on a variety of subjects, but the issues nearest and dearest to my heart are Wall Street reform, money, and getting big money out of politics, and fighting climate change. So with that, I will throw it over to Annabelle.
Thank you, Lauren. And thank you, Aisha, for being here. I'm really excited to hear what you have to say about what went right in Georgia. What I want to do right now is go right into what I'm calling a strategy memo to Democrats about why it's so important to make immigrant outreach the core of our national strategy. I feel that after having worked on a number of campaigns over the years, that immigrant outreach tends to kind of be in a campaign ghetto, under-resourced, and also often completely ignored. And often campaigns don't have even basic data about who's in their district, what languages are spoken, which countries they're from, what the English proficiency levels are, you know, information that I think is really critical to developing not only a good field plan, but an overall strategy to winning that campaign. And so I just want all of us to kind of take a deep breath and hear this one basic thesis. I'm going to throw out a lot of numbers at you in the next few minutes, but my basic argument is that if we want to win, we've got to focus on figuring out how to effectively reach out to immigrant voters. Okay. And I know there are a lot of reasons it doesn't happen. And most of the time when I talk to campaigns, it's about feeling like they don't have the resources, they don't know how to do it, and so on. And so we got to address the barriers kind of one at a time. But the intention, the will has to be there, that we're going through major demographic shifts in this country. And if we want to win elections, especially presidential elections, we have to do a better job of reaching out to immigrant voters. That's my argument. That's what I'm trying to prove. So I'm just going to try to very quickly go over some demographic information. And this is my first stab at really trying to develop a comprehensive argument for this. And I am going to send this out to everyone I know in the Democratic Party to see if I can really get their attention and get them to really make this our strategy. So big plans, big ideas, big ambitions, but I'm going to start with numbers right now. And feel free to ask questions. I'm going to try to, answer them, okay, during the presentation. All right. So that's our title. That's the argument. Okay, so as you can see, there are huge demographic changes. Okay, and there's a lot of information that will come out from the 2020 census, but this is one of the things that came out based on the analysis. As you can see, the white population is rapidly shrinking while non-white groups are growing. But especially take a look at Latino or Hispanic, Asian American. Okay, there are other immigrant groups, of course, like Arab Americans, North Africa, and other places. But I'm going to focus right now on Latinos and Asian Americans because we have readily available data on them. Okay, so number of immigrant voters is growing exponentially. Okay, between 2000 and 2020, the size of immigrant electorate nearly doubled to 23.2 million. On average, 860,000 naturalized citizens are sworn in each year. Even in the middle of a pandemic, 625,000 became citizens in 2020. Like just let that sink in. Okay, sometimes it's closer to 1 million. That's every year we have new citizens. They come from other countries. Okay. Right now, and again, this is going to change. This is going to grow. 1 in 10 of our eligible voters, 1 in 10 are naturalized citizens. And this is just to give you an idea, top 5 countries of people naturalizing. Mexico, India, Philippines, Cuba, and China. This is like right now. Okay, so of all the citizens naturalized in 2020, 71% resided in 10 states. Of these states, 3 are critical battleground states. Arguably, Virginia is still a battleground state, but I'm going to focus on Texas, Florida, and Georgia. Okay, so again, we want to figure out, especially in those 3 places, how we can reach out to these new citizens. A lot of people, for some reason, still believe that Asian Americans vote Republican. A lot of Latinos voted for Trump. Yes, they did, but look at this. I mean, they decisively voted for Biden. They're not Republicans. All right. Now look at the numbers for white women. They decisively voted for Trump. So this has been going on not just in 2020, but these are numbers from 2018 when there was a comprehensive survey. Asian Americans favor the Democratic Party. Okay, so again, this is a misconception that a lot of people have. They think Asian Americans vote Democratic. But look at the number for Indians, Asian Indians, 70%. Koreans, 62%. even Vietnamese, have a favorable opinion. These are not necessarily registered Democrats. These are people with favorable views of the Democratic Party. But AAPI Latino voters received less campaign contact than white and Black voters in battleground states in 2020. And some of it is that, you know, there's a language barrier, but often there's no attempt to reach out to them, even in battleground states. So you can imagine what happens in non-battleground states. So immigrant voters are critical to winning in battleground states. In Georgia, the AAPI turnout increased, sorry about the typo, increased by 62,000 in 2020 from 2016. Biden won by fewer than 12,000 votes. So let that sink in. 16, and then Aisha will tell us how that happened. 16% of eligible voters in Florida are naturalized citizens. 10% in Texas, 8% in Arizona. So look at this, and next time I do the presentation, I will make this all prettier. But numbers of Spanish-speaking people in battleground states are staggering. And these numbers will continue to grow. They're growing exponentially. So you see the total population, the number of Spanish speakers, percentage of total population, low. These are people with low English proficiency. And the reason why I keep pointing that out is it shows that there's an opportunity to reach them if we translate materials, to find ways to communicate them in their language. Okay, so now take a look at the Chinese, Vietnamese, because we know there are a lot of Spanish speakers in Texas, but take a look at Chinese, Vietnamese, Korean, Arabic. There are many others, but I'm just going to focus on that for right now. So this should help us understand the potential in Texas, okay? So Better Work lost to Ted Cruz in 2018 by 215,000 votes. Okay, now look at the numbers for Chinese-speaking people in Texas, Vietnamese, Korean, Arabic. That just gives you an idea of what I think is a real potential to win in a place like Texas and to flip it. So these are just ideas that I have to get our conversation started. And I'm hoping that during this hour, we can come up with a bunch of ideas that are more specific. But just to get the conversation going, how do we improve engaging immigrant voters? Well, I would like for all of us to advocate for this strategy, making engaging immigrant voters core of anyone campaigning in battleground states and many other places with large numbers of immigrant voters. We need to resource this work. We need to develop our tools, listen to the voters, okay? Learn the issues, identify community leaders, identify media serving these communities, recruit volunteers and staff who speak other languages, do research, check your assumptions about immigrant communities, learn how to communicate with them, translate, do the hard work of building authentic relationships. And we're going to do a demo at 3 p.m. in the video chat room, showing you the mapping tool that we created that will help people get more information on their voters. So 3 p.m. today in the video chat room. Okay. So I'm going to stop there for right now. Thank you.
Thanks, Annabelle.
For discussion. Okay.
I just want to key everyone into our name chyrons. To the right of our names is our Twitter handle. So if you want to engage with any of us on Twitter, please follow us. We'll follow you back, and happy to engage in this discussion offline as well. But I'm going to throw it over to Aisha.
Thanks, Lauren, and thanks, Annabelle, for inviting me to be part of the presentation today. I just want to start with kind of recapping the past year in Georgia, all eyes have been on Georgia for a very long time, and it's been a long time coming. I will say that ever since I've started working in this progressive space, Georgia has been severely underfunded and underinvested in, not just by campaigns, but by the larger progressive funding arena. I think over the past 2 years, though, Georgia has really been put on the map because of the incredible work of Black and Brown organizers that have brought to the forefront a whole host of issues that we are working on here in Georgia. So before I dive in and share some of the exciting work that we've done in Georgia, I want to sort of set the stage for the fight that we had in the runoff elections last year. We in Georgia did not come to the scene. It felt like Georgia came to the scene all of a sudden, but we have slowly been building on our power over the past 10 years, particularly in the Asian American community. Our population across the state of Georgia had grown tremendously over the last 10 years. My family has been in Georgia for the last 20 years, and I've seen that immense growth ever since I started attending high school and college, and how that community has grown ever since then. What we saw, though, in the last 5 to 6 years has been an incredible growth in sort of the nonprofit 501c3 progressive infrastructure in the year-round organizing arena. And that's really what has brought us to this point of being able to see the victories we did in 2020 and 2021. So again, it was not overnight that Georgia came to the scene. It was not an overnight victory of being able to flip the state, but it was year after year, being on the doors, talking to voters, not just during a major election, and making sure that we were talking to the voters who we knew the best and that we could communicate with the best. So particularly in the Asian American community, what did we see? We saw over the past 4 years, 100,000 new voters were registered and added to the voter rolls. That did not happen by accident. That was because of an investment and a lot of time that was spent in cultivating relationships, cultivating access to communities who were becoming newly naturalized, even amongst the Trump era, right? We know that naturalization was happening, and we knew that people were getting fired up wanting to get Trump out of office. And all of that paid off almost in 2018. We had that ability to just get Stacey Abrams elected, and that opportunity was stolen from us because of voter suppression and all the other shenanigans we saw in 2018. So we knew that 2020 was not too far away. We knew that we could make it happen. And that meant making sure we were talking to every voter and making sure we were talking to every voter in a way that would resonate with them. For my organization, that meant making sure that we were investing in our organizers and making sure that our organizers spoke the languages of the communities we were trying to organize. So yes, translated materials and making sure we were doing everything we could to put materials out in different languages was important, but it was our ability to speak people's languages, to go out and knock on doors, meet people at their grocery stores, and do the important relational organizing needed to actually achieve these victories. I want to share with you just some of the materials that we produced last year. I mean, there's a whole host and we have so many, but I picked out a couple of examples of the work we put out last year. And it really had to stand out. I think for the place we were in Georgia, where every single day our voters were getting inundated by phone calls, text messages, 5 or 6 mail pieces a day, we really had to make sure that our what we were putting out to our communities was not only in language, but resonated with them in a way that other campaigns and other organizations really couldn't put out. So that meant making sure that the that the graphics and sort of the creativity was there, but also that the messages and the storytelling was also there to help people understand why we really need to why we needed to show up and vote again in the Senate runoff. We also invested in partnerships with local Asian American artists to make things like this happen. This was part of a mailing campaign that we did and also turned into a graphic, a digital ad campaign to really show the impact that COVID has had in Asian American communities and why they needed to support Ossoff and Warnock in the runoff to sort of get us out of that, of the COVID situation that we were in last year. We also did some specific independent expenditure work. So this is a set of ads that we ran out of our state PAC specifically to help get Daniel Blackman elected to the Public Service Commission. During the runoff, I know all attention was on Ossoff and Warnock, but we also had an important runoff for Public Service Commissioner. And we worked with partners in the environmental and environmental justice space to make sure that we were uplifting those issues for our communities. We also had our materials and our information everywhere. It wasn't just in mail and text message and digital. We were actually out in the streets with billboards and ads around town. We had 17 billboards around the key Metro Atlanta areas, in addition to these large billboard trucks that were driving around all of the major Asian American grocery stores and hotspots during that peak runoff time. And people loved them. They were taking pictures with them. We had some ethnic music playing in each different location that they were at. And it really cultivated that sort of excitement for the runoff campaign. And then I think the most exciting thing about it is that we were also able to talk to voters at the door in up to 9 different languages during the peak of the runoff. So we weren't just preparing our canvassers to be able to talk to voters in different languages, but we were able to make sure that if a language need arose, that we had the ability to come back to that voter with that right language skill. And I apologize, my printer just decided to clean itself out of nowhere. But we've had multiple situations where if a voter went to a door and they couldn't quite speak the language that that voter wanted, we had an ability to kind of go back to our team and say that we need to send a Vietnamese speaking person to this house to be able to talk to this voter, because we want to make sure that every single vote gets cast and that we get a chance to talk to every voter. And that strategy paid off. We had people calling our hotline throughout election season saying, wow, thank you so much. I wasn't planning on voting, but because you all really sent this voter to my door and they talked me through the election and they talked me through the process, I went and voted today, and I wouldn't have done that without your support. We also did some really incredible work before the runoff, and I'll share some more about that in the Q&A. But we had an opportunity to really invest in local issues and local campaigns in a way that oftentimes doesn't get talked about enough. And I do have just a really quick video to share with you. We ran a ballot campaign last year to make sure that we could get public transit access to our communities in Gwinnett County, Georgia. We were the only organization running this ballot campaign, and we lost this vote by 1,100 votes. And we could have gotten there had more organizations really invested in this ballot initiative. So I'm just going to share this video with you. It's okay if you guys don't hear the audio. It's really just for the visuals of being able to see how we're really trying to make sure that we're talking to every single voter. And this was the first time that our communities really had investment, not just around campaigns and elected officials, but around important ballot issues like this transit campaign. This ad in particular played on Korean television and was promoted through Korean digital ads throughout the election cycle.
그리고 yes, 찬성 투표하세요. 안전하고 건강하게 11월 3일 귀넷 대중교통 주민투표에 yes, 찬성 투표하세요.
So I think just to wrap up a little bit of the story of Georgia, right? Like I said before, our work really showcased during the runoff, but we had incredible wins during election season all year in 2020 with an investment, again, in local races, local ballot issues, and making sure that we weren't leaving any voter out. We were able to secure the win, not just during the November election, but again, during the runoff. And there's a lot that we've learned. I'm happy to share more as we get into the Q&A.
Hi guys, popping back in. We're gonna, before we move into a panel discussion, answer Danielle's question. What percentage of eligible immigrant voters actually voted in 2020? I'll throw that to you, Annabelle.
Yeah, so I must have missed this slide actually. I had a slide for that. Okay.
And also for some reason we can't respond to the public chat, so I'm gonna do my best to verbally call people out, but I wanted to call out Nicole Rivera. Hey, girl.
Hey, so the turnout was actually extraordinary. The Asian American voter turnout increased by 10 points between 2016 and 2020. That's an extraordinary number, from 49 to 59. And the Latino voters by 6 points. So there was also an increase among white voters, and this is exactly what a lot of Republicans are afraid of. It's just this kind of the exponential growth of immigrant voter population, and the fact that we're now turning out to vote. So yeah, there's just incredible potential here, and yes, there are barriers, absolutely, to turning out the vote, but Asian Americans, I mean, it's an extraordinary number, right? How often do you see an increase like that? So we just have to keep building on this, even though there are many ways we can improve it, but we have momentum on our side.
So, heading into the panel discussion, coming off of what Aisha was talking about, Aisha, what do you think are the main takeaways from Georgia? Do you think that success there is replicatable in other states?
Yeah, thank you, Lauren, for that question. I think the main takeaway would be that it can't just be an investment during election season, and that there really has to be year-round investment in the work, not just in the lead up to the election, but between elections and in the off years. That really showed in our wins in 2020, because we were able to not just invest in the organizers, but also invest in infrastructure. And I don't think that gets talked about enough. I'll share with you my personal story. I came from the C3 world, from nonpartisan policy advocacy work, and in 2019 was brought into the C4 arena to be able to build out the C4 infrastructure for our work. And I had the ability to just focus on that for 6 months, and to be able to build out our team, build out the legal and fiscal infrastructure to be able to hold this work, and actually get our super PAC up and running, because we knew that we were going to have major US Senate runoffs well before everyone else sort of did. We knew that there would be a Senate runoff that we would have to run. We didn't know that there'd be two, and we didn't know that they would really define the future of this country in the way that they did. But we had that foresight to be able to set up the infrastructure to house a PAC, and house 2 PACs, one for our state and one for our federal work. And that did not come overnight. So I think the real key to our learnings would be investment in the organizing, but also investment in infrastructure and support for our work. And then I think the other thing that I didn't get a chance to cover earlier was just that our wins were not just for our communities. We didn't just turn out the vote for Asian American voters, although our target and our main outreach was for Asian American voters. We did so in collaboration with other Black and Brown organizations. So when we worked on sheriffs and district attorneys races in Gwinnett and Cobb counties and worked to flip those seats, it wasn't just because Asian Americans cared about those races. It was because we knew that those seats were vital to make sure that we were changing the dynamics for other Black and Brown communities in those counties. And so I think the two key takeaways would be the investment in infrastructure and organizing, as well as making sure that we're also building with other organizations and other communities along the way.
I do want to, I was just thinking about how caught up we are in the moment of progressives hating Senators Manchin and Sinema, and really, I think we take for granted that we could be in a totally different landscape without having won those 2 Senate seats in Georgia. So just want to take a moment again to recognize the amazing organizing work you did on the ground there to even put us in the situation of being able to complain about, those 2 senators. We just take it for granted as progressives. And we could have zero negotiating room whatsoever if Mitch McConnell were in control of the Senate. I was on the ground covering the Senate races in Georgia, and really, really, thank you. Annabelle, did you want to weigh in at all on anything that Aisha had to say about that?
Yeah, no, I so appreciate that approach, the collaborative approach. And I think one thing that Dalila wanted to say, she isn't here to say it, but I'm going to try to summarize it, which is that she feels like one of the barriers to people participating in the immigrant community is just the sense that the politicians don't care. And volunteers who come from campaigns don't really care. And so her approach to organizing is to really focus on building relationships where she finds opportunities to show how much she cares and brings organizations to work on issues together. And so it's not just that you just show up every 2 or 4 years and say, hey, come vote. And then you don't see anyone again. So what she does is really, to me, a great model for going forward is that, yes, we need voter contact, we need translation, but we also need authentic dialogue, authentic relationships, and find opportunities to show that you care, and which is something that Aisha is doing, working on all these other issues, being there when there was this terrible shooting in Atlanta that traumatized people. I know that Dalila was in the middle of a campaign that she was running for the city council seat, but then during the Texas freeze, she was organizing her community and delivering life-saving supplies to people so that they weren't freezing to death or starving to death during that time. And so that's why people trust her in her community, because she's always there serving the community. And I think that we have to sort of, if we really want to win, if we're really serious about creating infrastructure, we have to find those opportunities to just show that we care and just listen to people and not make this a one-way conversation from campaign or advocacy organization to voters. But we've got to figure out how to receive feedback and listen to what concerns them and what their needs are.
I feel like I am privy to a lot of these conversations on the left where, it's always discussion about we need to reach out to immigrant voters. We need to reach out to communities of color. We need to be building that critical infrastructure in states like Georgia, Texas, Arizona, so forth, that have been traditionally red. But, there's this promise of turning blue. But, building all that infrastructure takes money. And why is it so difficult to get the donors on board with this? What are the challenges that you're seeing in the donor community, Aisha?
I think for me, at least, trying to fund Asian American organizing, the biggest challenge is in helping people to understand that we are not a monolith. I know that Asian American Pacific Islander has this sort of category as it seems these days, but even amongst that, there are so many delineations of language needs, cultural competencies that are needed, religious differences that we have to be able to talk about. And so it's not as easy as being able to fund one program. Oftentimes our day-to-day work is funding multiple different programs for different ethnic groups. So my Korean organizer was running a completely different organizing strategy than my Vietnamese organizers were. I had different South Asian organizers that were doing different work based on what their communities needed. And that's often hard to explain and sort of put down on paper, because everything that we're doing is very agile based on what we're hearing in the community. And I think that's the great part of our work, is that because we have language and cultural competency, we can make adjustments to our program very quickly. Sometimes harder to sort of explain that to funders and get them to understand how different and how vastly different the organizing needs are for each community. So I think that's a major need, but then I'll follow that up with also saying that, historically we haven't had the sort of numbers in Georgia that we have now. I mean, we are finally getting recognition in the larger political landscape that Asian American voters in Georgia matter, but it's taken us this long to get here. So even though we knew the numbers were there, the political community didn't know that, funders didn't know that. And so we are trying to now tell our story and tell the story of our voters to really contend for those dollars going into 22 and 24.
I didn't know if you had anything to add to that, Annabelle. You look like you might have something to add. Otherwise, I think we had a clarification question on the side in the sidebar. But we can save those questions for after the panel discussion. So let's talk about false assumptions about immigrant voters. What are the things that stand in the outreach to these communities in the campaigns that you're leading and taking part in? And I'll just throw it out there for whoever wants to jump in and take it first.
Well, one is that immigrants don't vote. I actually worked with an immigrant candidate who said immigrants don't vote. And he was running for office, and so as I showed in the last slide, that's not true. I mean, yeah, it is difficult in some places to convince people who have never voted to vote, but for Asian Americans, there was an extraordinary transformation between the last election and 2020, because many of those people who turned out to vote had never voted before. And I will get you guys numbers for the next time we do this, but it was a very large percentage. And so absolutely, so much of this is about figuring out ways to communicate better with them and to make it clear how the political issues, how elections affect their lives. But so that is like not my pet peeve when people say immigrants don't vote. I start losing my mind.
I'll jump in also and say that I think the biggest misconception that I've seen is that, especially in Asian American sort of political spaces, is that candidates just assume that immigration and immigration reform is the only issue at the top of mind for our communities. And it is a very important issue, and a lot of our communities are really invested in seeing immigration reform this year and in the coming years. But that's not it, right? We know that our communities are encompassing of a whole lot more than just the need for immigration reform. And that really showed up for us in 2020 because we talked to voters about other things. We talked about how COVID-19, the response to COVID-19 has really impacted their small businesses. We talked about how access to healthcare has become an issue for voters outside of Metro Atlanta. We talked about the need for addressing the incredibly high costs of higher education and student debt. And I think that the more that candidates and parties and organizations learn about our communities, the more authentically they can reach out to them outside of just the guise of immigration. Because although, like I said, it is a key issue, it's not the only issue that our communities want to work on.
I concur. I mean, I definitely see Republicans all the time in their messaging to immigrant and minority communities focusing on economic issues. And, that's really what the majority of voters, regardless, I think, of, race, care about. At the end of the day, like, how am I going to provide for my family? What can you do to create good jobs, to increase our pay, to, make our schools better? Anything that matters to, I think, regular voter, a white voter, these are all things that I think, pocketbook economic issues matter to everyone. And it's not like, oh, you're an immigrant, you must only care about race, or sorry, you're an immigrant, you must only care about immigration. So I thought you wanted to chime in there for a second, Annabelle, so that's why I was like, sit back for a second.
Oh yeah, I could just go on for hours about this. It would be a long rant, but I wanted to
rant, girl, rant, do it.
Yeah, I have a lot of this building up for working on many campaigns and seeing things not done when it's just, to me, it's a no-brainer. Like, I volunteered for Better Works campaign in 2018. He did not translate his campaign materials into any of the Asian languages. And we were trying to door knock in Dallas and Houston. And it was just an incredible lost opportunity, in my opinion. So those are some ways in which I don't know what the barriers. I don't know how to convince candidates that are even well-resourced to actually take this seriously. Because how you can't complain about people not voting if you don't even make the contact, even if you don't translate materials, if you don't recruit volunteers who speak those languages to do the door knocking. Most campaigns don't do that. And so this is the one tip I want to give everybody is when you do volunteer intake for your campaign organization, ask your volunteers what languages they speak. And then send them out to those places where you're going to have high concentration of people who speak that language. And again, right now, what we're creating a tool, the mapping tool that will help you do that automatically. But if you don't have easy access to that data, just start asking people in the community, where are the Korean Americans? Where are the Arabic Americans? And just start gathering that information and recruit volunteers and make use of their language skills.
All right, so we're at 1:40, so we should move into like the audience segment of incorporating these questions into our discussion. So I'm just going to start from the top of the queue on the side, and we already got to Danielle Thompson, but Marjorie Roswell had for Aisha. I'll be interested in what groups you've seen in your work that do immigrant outreach well. What tools do you think were helpful? Any ideas for tools still needed? Did the software support the relational organizing of immigrants in language?
Yeah, thank you for that question. Because there were so many groups that came into Georgia, I honestly don't know who was doing what. So I can't really answer who did what well. But what I do know is the groups that were successful were the ones that had organizers from that community doing the organizing. And that meant organizers from Georgia, but also organizers from that ethnic community that had that language and cultural competency. That is what I've seen work well. In terms of tools and softwares, our team used the Organizing Empowerment Relational Organizing tool, which did allow us to work with WhatsApp and some other messaging tools to sort of get our messages out. I know we've tried to do some work in language, and so those tools are we're still working out what's the best way to do that work with our communities, because there are some gaps, right? There are some other messaging softwares like Kakao and WeChat that we're not sort of using in the best way to do our work, but there are going to be opportunities for us to further invest in that sort of organizing. One thing that was incredibly successful for us during the runoff was we just created a digital activation squad. I think the other thing that people that didn't work in Georgia might not realize is that after the 2020 election, when Facebook and Google started their advertising bans, that really hit us hard because we could not do any digital advertising until December 15th before the January 5th election. So we could not really invest so much in digital ads because of the Facebook and Google ad bans. So we had to be really creative and create our own sort of organic messaging shops and organic digital campaigns to make sure that we were reaching our voters. And so we did. We used sort of old school phone tree style organizing. And we sent digital graphics and sample messaging to our uncles and aunties who are influencers in their own groups. And we had them send messages out for us and sort of cultivate the excitement around the runoff because we couldn't use the sort of traditional digital advertising that we had been using in the lead up to the 2020 cycle. I think we do need some additional software updates. I think the other really key gap, Annabelle talks about this a lot, is just in the data infrastructure. And so I won't talk about that too much, but I think the real gap is being able to make sure that we are able to identify our voters and talk to them with enough information about who the voters are, what language needs they have, and how we're really speaking to them in the best way.
So this is another one for Aisha from Carson Veneman. Really great work. Is there anything that you tried that did not work as well as expected versus things that seem to have worked out really well?
That's a good question. We tried to do a whole lot of text messaging in 2020, and that did not work very well, not for our communities. I mean, I think it's arguable. I don't know how well it did for other voters, but at least for Asian American voters, people were not responsive. People were not really willing to sort of have those conversations with us over text messages. So we invested a lot in phone banking, particularly in language phone banking. And that was we spent a lot more time doing that rather than in text message conversations, which, are easier to recruit volunteers for, but are not necessarily the most impactful piece of our work. The other thing that worked really well, on the other hand, was Sometimes we did use our text messages to promote our in-language hotline, which then people were able to call us and ask us questions. So maybe they didn't respond to our text message, but they could call our hotline if they had some very specific questions about the election or the candidates or what is going on, because the election date kept changing in Georgia because of COVID. Our primaries got pushed again. So there was just so much confusion around that time. And us being able to operate in language hotlines in multiple languages helped us to keep tabs on what people needed and what they wanted to hear from us. And that was, really helpful, because then we were able to create informational material that addressed the very specific questions our communities were facing, and were able to follow up with voters that had issues throughout election season. So from a voter who had a hard time registering to vote and then had a hard time getting their absentee ballot and then didn't get their absentee ballot in time, making sure that they showed up during early voting to cast their ballot. You can't do that if you're just relying on text message alone. So we really utilized all the different tools and opportunities we had to make sure that we were connecting with every single voter.
So the next question is from Dan Jacoby, but I'm going to flip over to another one from Carson for Annabelle. How will the mapping tool be best integrated into future campaigns?
Yeah, I mean, the way we could use the information in the mapping tool is look for opportunities. Like I think every bit of information should be translated into an opportunity. So for instance, there's voter registration information in the mapping tool. So where there are places where there's low registration numbers, it's an opportunity to go register people to vote. Where places where you've seen a major shift in terms of demographics, like a huge number of people who speak Spanish moved into that area, right? Or you've had they were voting Republican, and then suddenly there's a 20% spike in people voting Democrat. So where you see these shifts, I think again you see that there are huge changes taking place, and it's an opportunity for us to get into those communities, get to know it. We can't do this abstractly. Get to know it and find the opportunities to engage voters. And so what I would do is work with campaigns. As a team, we would work with campaigns and organizations to map out what is potentially a great strategy, and then a field plan to go along with it. That it would include things like recruiting volunteers, doing media buys in language. The first time I helped a campaign buy a full-page ad in the Korean paper, a group of us cried because it had never been done before. And like campaigns were noticing us and thinking that we were important. And even now, it's so rare that it has an emotional impact. And so there are so many things that we can do, once we have the will and the commitment, understand the strategy, and then go from that to working with people in the communities and figure out the best way forward to reach out to voters there. So yeah, that's what I would do. I mean, the data is always like a guide, but it's not going to give us all the answers. We have to talk to people.
Okay, and Dan, I am going to get to you, but I'm going to throw one other question out before we come back to Dan's question, because I feel like the Dan's question on the coattails top-down campaign concept, warrants a little bit longer time. But I'm going to throw this over to Nicole Rivera's question. The best practice is, of course, for campaigns to hire from on-the-ground immigrants in the community. What sort of recruiting practices have worked to find the best talent? How are you staffing your campaigns? What are your best practices?
I can share a little bit. It's very hard. Hiring is very hard, and retention is very hard, especially in Georgia when we had national campaigns and national organizations coming in that were paying a whole lot more, and we're sort of making it harder for us to kind of retain our own talent. But I think now that the runoff is over, we're really trying to make sure that we are keeping relationships with folks that were our door knockers and our canvassers during that peak time. That includes making sure that we are paying a great wage for canvassers. During COVID, we had to pay a whole lot more just because of all of the various health and safety concerns that came up during COVID. We also had to have incredibly strict COVID protocols to make sure we were keeping our canvassers safe. But recruiting them has always been a challenge. I will not say that it was easy. We make sure that we are present in all of the college fairs and all of the community fairs and festivals that happen every year, just because we have those relationships on the ground with community, with influencers in the community, with community leaders. We can sort of tap into them to help recommend organizers and help recommend that talent that we need to bring on. But I think that's always going to be a challenge, especially going into 22 and 24, to make sure that we're cultivating those sorts of connections and building up our team again for the next 2 cycles.
Did you have anything to add to that, or I think it's time to jump over to Dan Jacoby?
Sure.
It's Jacoby, right? Did I get it right this time, Dan? He's schooling me on the pronunciation of his name in the chat. Jacoby. So just so everyone knows what question that is, it's where are you? Fascinating how in Georgia, working on local issues and candidates helps set the stage for the 2 Senate runoffs. How important is it to reverse the coattails top-down campaign concept and replace it with a bottom-up approach?
I think that was the key to our victory, quite frankly. We didn't talk much about the Senate races and the general election. We just didn't. We focused on our local races. We focused on our state legislature. And we wanted to make sure that we were bringing enough focus to the issues that would help people day in and day out. The Senate races were also very messy. I mean, we had a contested 19-person race to make sure that Warnock was the person in the runoff. We had candidates running for that election that were in the news every day for really shady things, and so we knew that messiness wasn't going to be the thing that was motivating our voters. And instead, we focused on the things that they were facing day in and day out in their communities. Issues with their school board and how their school boards were handling COVID, transit, transportation issues, education, and really helping to make connections back to those local and down ballot races. I think that was key to our success, was being able to focus on the down ballot throughout the year. And then when it came time to the runoff, not necessarily changing our message, because we didn't want to flip the script and say, okay, now you have to care about the top of the ticket, but just making it very clear that the victory in the U.S. Senate runoff would have an impact at the very local level, and helping to make those connections. And so explaining to the small business owner how getting Ossoff and Warnock elected would help their bottom line and help them as a small business owner get back to work and get their employees back to work. So it wasn't a night to day shift in how we messaged about our 2 election cycles. It was really about continuing that focus on the local community, on what their needs were. I hope that people will continue that sort of focus towards local and down ballot races. And I think it's going to be incredibly important for us in Georgia in 22 and 24 to also address sort of the middle of the ballot with the state legislature. We did really well on very local races in 2020. We flipped 2 county commissions, we flipped a school board, we flipped district attorney and sheriff's races, but we lost a lot of state legislative races that we should have won. And so that is our goal going into 22 and 24, is to win back state legislative races so we can get at least a majority in the House, so we can fight back against voter suppression bills, abortion bans, and other really hateful measures that we know are coming to hit our communities.
Yeah, when you said sheriff's race earlier, it was like, yes, way to go, sheriff's race. You don't normally hear, big progressive pushes around sheriff's races, but I think it is key to be fighting in all of those down ballot races. We're going to throw it over to Annabelle to answer the recruitment question about. Nicole asked, how do we find talent for, these within immigrant communities on the ground? So Annabelle?
Yeah, and this actually, my answer is connected to something Jess Newman just wrote in the chat about Bernie building this all volunteer translation team. What I think works well, and I've seen this, and it kind of happened to me, is, you know, if you do a good job of recruiting volunteers, you're going to get some talented people, and you can give them responsibilities, and they could be converted into staff, right? And so I would say do a bang up job of volunteer recruitment, treat them well, find out what their skills are, and start giving them responsibility, and recruit them for staff. That's I think that's something that would work, I think, and I've seen it work. I saw it happen during the Bernie campaign in 2016, and this is something that happened to me when I walked into a campaign in 2006 in Virginia, the Virginia Senate race. And so they're highly motivated, and they're often willing to do the work without pay. But if you do pay them and give them responsibility and a title, see what they can do. So I would really do a serious assessment of the volunteer recruitment and intake.
All right, we have 5 minutes remaining, and before we get to get booted out of the room, I do want to make sure that everyone knows how we can support the important work that Aisha is doing on the ground in Georgia. So, Aisha, how can folks support the Asian American Advocacy Fund and the work that you're doing?
Yeah, thank you for that question. We are always happy to accept donations to our organization. Like I mentioned before, we're a C4 organization. We also have a state and federal super PAC. And my biggest ask would be to help us raise money for our state PAC, because next year we've got incredibly important statewide elections. We are hoping to elect a really great governor, and I'm hoping that we have Stacey Abrams announcing very soon, so we can sort of build on that excitement from 2018. We also have an Asian American candidate running for Secretary of State, and could really be a game changer for us in the state of Georgia, not just for representation's sake, but also to make sure that we actually have power in the Secretary of State's office in restoring voting rights. So I would highly recommend supporting us. Our links are on our website, asianamericanaadvocacyfund.org. It's pretty straightforward from there. But if you are interested in supporting us in a volunteer capacity, we are working on incredibly critical city council elections this year in the city of Atlanta, Johns Creek, and Marietta, where we're really changing the face of local elected officials here in Georgia. So there's opportunities for us listed on our website, and I hope that everyone will support.
Just another note, everyone who's speaking, everyone who's on this panel, to the right of their name is their Twitter handle. So you may not be able to donate funds, but you can certainly spread the word to other people. And, you know, promoting the work of fellow activists is very important so that we can build that echo chamber. So follow everyone here, and, you know, when they put out tweets that have to do with the work that they're doing that inspires you, then share those tweets. And that's something that you can do that doesn't cost you anything. Annabelle, how can folks support the tool that you're building to, you know, get this out to other campaigns?
Yeah, well, you can go to our website, immigrantvoterproject.com. We're also an exhibitor, so you can find our booth. We have this demo scheduled at 3 p.m. I would really love it if some of you could come to that, so you can get a better understanding of what we're up to. And we're also looking for partnerships and collaborations. We're in this because we want to support Democrats win elections. So don't be shy, you know, come talk to us. We're game. And you can schedule a time with me and my team at calendly.com, Annabelle S. Park. So you can just set up a time to meet. But thank you, Lauren. I'm so
glad. Yeah, I mean, we still have like 2 minutes. So, I mean, if we can answer one more question. I think we had one at the end here from Alan Robinson. Is there a way to focus on college-educated immigrant voters, as college-educated voters across all races tend to identify as Democrats in larger numbers than non-college-educated voters? This might be a little bit too in-depth for us to get into 2 minutes, but if you have something.
Yeah, I think that's a question that I could ask Karsten, who's developed the map, to see if we could get that kind of data, because the idea is to kind of keep layering in more data into the tool. So hopefully we can get there, Alan. So that would be my answer. I think the information is probably available. But Karsten, maybe if you're still here, you can answer that in the chat.
Any parting remarks anyone wants to give? Aisha, Annabelle, we have a minute remaining. Otherwise, it's not a hard stop. We can go over if we want. So if we want to answer that last question in more detail, or if we have any closing remarks we want to make, we should do that now.
Yeah, one thing I want to add is just I think we really need to have conversations. We need to get into huddle and have serious conversations about strategy. So it's not just about immigrants, but what is our strategy for growth going forward? And to me, this is such a no-brainer because the immigrant voting group is the one that's growing exponentially. So I don't see how anybody could ignore this if they're talking about strategy. But we need more conversations about strategy and about reaching out to immigrant voters. So I'm pleading with everyone to do that, to like ask questions to people who are making the decisions, ask the DNC to meet with us, and just see if we could get onto a path where we're getting, 90% or 80, at least 80% of new citizens registering with the Democratic Party. I think that's possible.
Well, then I will leave it on that note from Annabelle, the amazing organizer of this panel. Thank you, Annabelle, for all the hard work that you put into this and for inviting me to moderate. Thank you to Aisha for coming on and sharing all of your hard-fought, hard-won lessons from Georgia. I really, and I know all progressives really appreciate the hard work that you did there to help us win the Senate. So hopefully we can hold on to it in 2022. So let's go forward, progressive, together, and electrify immigrant communities so that we can retain control of the House and Senate in 2022.
Thank you, Lauren. Thank you, Aisha. Thanks, everybody.